kids maybe, hearing Jimi Hendrix, you suddenly think, what the hell is he playing? But it didn't do.
Charlie Watts.
Charlie Watts was the beating heart of the Rolling Stones for over half a century, yet he remained an enigma in the world of rock and roll. While his bandmates chased the spotlight, Watts kept time with an understated elegance that defined the sound of the world's greatest rock and roll band. A jazz drummer at heart who found himself in a rock and roll circus, Watts approached his craft with the precision of a craftsman and the soul of an artist. In an era of flamboyant rock stars, Watts cut a different figure entirely. Impeccably dressed in custom-made suits, he sat behind his modest drum kit with the quiet dignity of a jazz musician, providing the foundation that allowed Mick Jagger and Keith Richards to strut and swagger across the world's largest stages. His contribution to music went far beyond mere timekeeping. He was the architect of a groove that helped define popular music for generations. What made Charlie Watts extraordinary wasn't just his masterful drumming, but the way he remained steadfastly himself throughout decades of excess and evolution in popular music. He was proof that true artistry doesn't require theatrics, that greatness can be achieved through dedication, consistency, and an unwavering commitment to one's craft. His story is not just about music, it's about staying true to oneself while helping to create something larger than life. Early life and background. Charles Robert Watts came into the world on June 2, 1941, in a London still reeling from the Blitz. Born in University College Hospital, Wembley, his childhood unfolded in the working-class district of Kingsbury, where his father worked as a lorry driver for British Railways. Unlike many rock stars who emerged from hardship, Watts grew up in a relatively stable, middle-class home that valued both education and creativity. Young Charlie's first exposure to music came through the radio and his neighbour Dave Green, who would become a lifelong friend and fellow jazz musician. While other children were captivated by the emerging sound of rock and roll, Watts fell under the spell of jazz. Charlie Parker and Duke Ellington records became his musical education, and he began to dream not of rock stardom, but of the sophisticated world of jazz. His first drum wasn't actually a drum at all. It was a banjo that he stripped of its strings and played as a makeshift snare. This improvised instrument would be his practice kit until 1955, when his parents finally bought him his first proper drum set. Rather than taking formal lessons, Watts learned by listening and practicing, developing an intuitive style that would later blend jazz finesse with rock power. The 1950s saw Watts attending Tyler's Crofts Secondary Modern School, where his artistic talents began to emerge. He proved to be a gifted artist and eventually enrolled at Harrow Art School. While studying graphic design and working at Charlie Daniels Studios' advertising agency, Watts continued to play drums in local jazz bands. These early years shaped not just his musicianship, but his whole approach to life, measured, artistic, and always with an eye for detail. By the early 1960s, Watts was becoming a regular fixture in London's burgeoning rhythm and blues scene, playing with Blues Incorporated while maintaining his day job in advertising. He was earning a reputation as a solid, sophisticated drummer who could swing like a jazz player but adapt to the harder edges of rhythm and blues. Little did he know that this reputation would soon lead him to a group of young musicians who would change his life forever. Joining the Stones and Rise. In 1962, the trajectory of Charlie Watts's life changed forever when he encountered a group of young musicians who were rapidly making a name for themselves on London's rhythm and blues circuit. While playing with Blues Incorporated, Watts caught the attention of Brian Jones, Mick Jagger, and Keith Richards. The Rolling Stones needed a drummer, but Watts wasn't immediately convinced. He had a steady job in advertising, played regular jazz gigs, and viewed rock and roll with a certain skepticism. The Stones persisted in their pursuit, and in January 1963, Watts finally agreed to join the band. His first official performance with them was at the Ealing Jazz Club, marking the beginning of what would become one of rock's most enduring partnerships. The salary of £5 per week wasn't much, but it was enough to convince the practical-minded Watts to take the risk. His impact on the band was immediate and profound. While his bandmates were still finding their footing, Watts brought a level of musical sophistication that elevated their sound. His jazz-influenced technique gave the Stones a swing that set them apart from other British R&B bands. Rather than simply keeping time, Watts created space in the music, allowing the songs to breathe and groove in a way that would become their signature sound. The early years were a whirlwind of tours, recordings, and increasing fame. As the band evolved from covering American blues to creating their own distinctive sound, Watts's drumming evolved with them. Songs like I Can't Get No Satisfaction, Get Off of My Cloud, and Paint It Black showcased his ability to adapt his jazz sensibilities to rock and roll while maintaining an unmistakable style. Throughout this period of rapid ascent, Watts remained remarkably unchanged by fame. While his bandmates embraced the excesses of rock stardom, he maintained his quiet demeanour and jazz enthusiast sensibility. He would often sketch every hotel room he stayed in during tours, maintaining his connection to his artistic roots even as the band's success reached unprecedented heights. Peak years and achievements. The late 1960s and early 1970s marked the zenith of the Rolling Stones' creative and commercial success, with Charlie Watts' drumming playing a crucial role in shaping their most iconic albums. During this period, his work on albums like Beggar's Banquet, 1968, Let It Bleed, 1969, Sticky Fingers, 1971, and Exile on Main Sea, 1972, demonstrated the full range of his abilities, from the driving force behind Gimme Shelter to the subtle sophistication of Wild Horses. Watts' drumming style during these years set new standards in rock music. Unlike many of his contemporaries who sought to dazzle with elaborate solos and flashy techniques, he focused on serving the song. His approach was marked by an economy of movement and an impeccable sense of timing. The slight delay in his beat, particularly noticeable in classics like Tumbling Dice, created a distinctive groove that became part of the Stones' signature sound. On stage, Watts was the band's anchor during their most ambitious tours. The 1969 American tour, which culminated in the infamous Altamont Free concert, showcased his ability to maintain steady rhythms even in chaos. The 1972 North American tour, documented in the film Ladies and Gentlemen, the Rolling Stones, captured him at his peak, providing the foundation for what many consider the band's finest live performances. His technical innovations during this period were subtle but influential. The way he tuned his drums, particularly on recordings like Midnight Rambler and Can't You Hear Me Knocking, influenced a generation of drummers. His use of jazz-inspired brushwork on ballads and his ability to switch seamlessly between different styles within the same song demonstrated a versatility rare in rock drumming. In the studio, Watts was known for his precision and efficiency. Unlike many drummers who required countless takes, he could usually nail a track in just a few attempts. Producer Jimmy Miller noted that Watts had an uncanny ability to maintain the same tempo throughout an entire song without the need for a click track, a skill that became particularly valuable as recording techniques grew more sophisticated. By the mid-1970s, Charlie Watts had helped establish the Rolling Stones as the greatest rock and roll band in the world, while maintaining his reputation as the band's most skilled musician. His contributions during this period weren't just about keeping time. They were about creating a rhythmic foundation that allowed the band to explore new musical territories while maintaining their essential character. Personal life and challenges. Behind the steady beat of the Rolling Stones, Charlie Watts maintained a personal life that stood in stark contrast to the typical rock star narrative. In 1964, he married Shirley Ann Shepherd, whom he met before the band's rise to fame. Their marriage would last until his death, marking one of rock's most enduring relationships. Together, They had one daughter, Serafina, born in 1968, who would later give Charlie his only grandchild, Charlotte. Unlike his bandmates' highly publicised relationships and escapades, Watts's home life was remarkably stable. He and Shirley established a horse breeding farm in rural Devon, where they raised Arabian horses. This pastoral existence provided a peaceful counterpoint to the chaos of touring life, allowing Watts to maintain his equilibrium during the band's most turbulent years. However, even the most grounded member of the Stones wasn't immune to the pressures and temptations of rock stardom. In the mid-1980s, Watts faced his darkest period, developing a serious addiction to heroin and alcohol. What started as experimentation nearly derailed both his career and his life. The situation became so severe that he was reportedly falling asleep at the drum kit during recording sessions. His recovery came as quietly as his descent. With the support of his wife and family, Watts overcame his addiction through a combination of determination and his characteristic self-discipline. He later reflected that this period was completely out of character for him, calling it his midlife crisis. After his recovery, he remained sober for the rest of his life. Later years brought health challenges. In 2004, he was diagnosed with throat cancer. But after treatment, he returned to touring with the same steady presence behind the kit. This brush with mortality seemed to strengthen rather than diminish his commitment to both his family and his music. Beyond the Stones. While the Rolling Stones consumed much of Charlie Watts's professional life, he never abandoned his first love, jazz. Throughout his career, he maintained parallel musical projects that allowed him to explore his jazz roots. In the 1980s, he formed the Charlie Watts Orchestra, a 32-piece band that performed traditional swing music. This was followed by smaller ensembles, including the Charlie Watts Quintet and the Charlie Watts Tentet. These jazz projects produced several acclaimed albums, including Live at Fulham Town Hall, 1986, From One Charlie, 1991, and Warm and Tender, 1993. Through these recordings, Watts demonstrated his versatility as a musician and his deep understanding of jazz traditions. He often said that these projects were where he felt most musically fulfilled, allowing him to play the music that had first inspired him to become a drummer. Beyond music, Watts pursued various personal interests with the same quiet passion he brought to drumming. His love for fashion was legendary within the band. He was known for his collection of bespoke suits from London's finest tailors, maintaining a sartorial elegance that reflected his appreciation for classic style. This extended to his interest in vintage cars, though famously he never learned to drive. His artistic talents went beyond music. An accomplished artist and collector, Watts produced illustrations for several books, including a tribute to Charlie Parker. He also maintained an impressive collection of jazz memorabilia and rare drums, reflecting his deep appreciation for the history of his craft. These pursuits painted a picture of a Renaissance man whose interests extended far beyond the confines of rock stardom, legacy and influence. Charlie Watts's impact on popular music extends far beyond his role in the Rolling Stones. His distinctive drumming style influenced generations of musicians, offering a masterclass in how restraint and sophistication could be just as powerful as raw energy and showmanship. Many renowned drummers, including Max Weinberg, Steve Jordan, and Ringo Starr, have cited Watts as a major influence on their playing. What set Watts apart was his ability to blend jazz sophistication with rock power. His technique of slightly dragging behind the beat created a signature groove that became essential to the Stones' sound. This approach demonstrated that rock drumming could be both powerful and nuanced, influencing countless musicians who followed. His economic style proved that less could indeed be more, challenging the notion that great rock drumming required flashy solos and excessive flourishes. In the broader cultural landscape, Watts represented a different kind of rock star. His dignified demeanour and lifelong dedication to his craft offered an alternative to the excessive lifestyle often associated with rock music. he showed that one could achieve the heights of rock stardom while maintaining personal integrity and artistic authenticity. His legacy is also evident in his approach to the role of a band member. Watts understood that his job was to serve the music rather than his ego. This selfless approach to musicianship influenced not just drummers, but band dynamics across genres. He proved that steadiness, reliability, and musical intelligence were just as valuable as charisma and showmanship in creating enduring music. Charlie Watts remained the backbone of the Rolling Stones until his passing in 2021, embodying the rare combination of extraordinary talent and genuine humility. His legacy lives on not just in the timeless recordings of the Stones, but in the countless musicians he inspired to approach their craft with dedication, sophistication, and grace. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the life of one of rock's most influential drummers, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more explorations of music's greatest legends. Hit the like button if you learned something new about Charlie Watts, and share this video with fellow music lovers. Leave a comment below with your favourite Charlie Watts moment or performance.